Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Literacy View. We have another interesting episode coming up, and this one will focus on Mark Seidenberg's latest article entitled About the Science in the Science of Reading. And we have invited a very special guest on with us today, Dr. Tiffany Peltier. And she is, let me just get everything. She is the lead learning and delivery specialist, literacy at NWEA. And she has over 12 years of experience in education, serving as an elementary school teacher, pre-K, K1 in 3 different states, acting as an instructional coach to elementary teachers and teaching undergraduate pre-service teachers. So we welcome Tiffany with us today. And the reason we had asked Tiffany on was because I remember, and I mentioned this to Judy, that Tiffany was always very vocal about putting the science into the science of reading. And some people weren't too happy about that. As a matter of fact, when I first started reading things like this, I was also wondering, what is this? But I started really following Tiffany, the articles that she posted, and it was always rooted in science. And I felt that she would be a great person to speak to Mark Seidenberg's latest article, because he doesn't seem like he likes the direction that this science of reading movement is going in. So I'm going to start with a quote that he has from the article, and I'll ask Tiffany to comment, and then we'll bring Judy Boxner in. By the way, I'm Faith Borkowski, and you could follow us on Facebook and Twitter and every platform on social media. Okay, here's the quote, Tiffany. Mark Seidenberg said, "I'm going to lay my cards on the table here. The treatment of PA, which would be phonological awareness, in the science of reading, the idea that a certain level of PA is prerequisite for reading, and that PA training should continue until the student becomes highly proficient at PA tasks, regardless of how well they are reading, is emblematic of problems that have arisen within the SOR approach." Tiffany, what are some of your thoughts about that quote and in general about the direction of science of reading, SOR?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks for asking. So I think, he kind of gets into this in his article. There are a lot of people trying to help kids learn, right? There are a lot of people who really care about kids learning to read, and they're trying to figure out the best way to do this. And when the science of reading really became part of the spotlight, there were popular authors and speakers telling people and leading people to believe that part of the science of reading was this phonemic proficiency. Students need to be proficient in all of these different levels. They need to go through syllables in phonological awareness, and then not just blending and segmenting phonemes, but they need to be able to do these advanced phonemic awareness tasks. And because of that, people, again, well-intentioned, are trying to do the right thing. They're pushing for these to be in laws, to be in curricula. And so some states have adopted these in standards or regulations, and telling teachers that they need to be assessing and teaching phonemic awareness separate from letters, oral only, these other levels. And we don't have a strong research base suggesting that is needed. And so it is like this big game of telephone sometimes. Like, we have this research, someone then writes a book or does a professional development about it, and then someone else hears it, and then they try to translate it again, and things get lost in translation if we're not going back to that original science. So I think that's what's happened here with this movement we see with the science of reading. There's a lot of great things, but there's also a lot of things that have been misinterpreted from the reading science.
Yeah, it has morphed into something different. So Judy, if you could just jump in and comment either about what Tiffany said or about the quote that I mentioned from the article. What are some of your thoughts?
So one of my thoughts is that I'm really excited that we even have this term phonemic awareness and we're all speaking about it. I remember years ago in schools, people were like phonics, phonemic awareness. People thought it was the same thing. People misused the word. So I do see a positive in the fact that we are talking about it. Now, a lot of my science of reading journey began with Equipped for Reading Success from Kilpatrick. I thought it was a very user-friendly read. I thought that it was interesting because he had the assessment in there. I think it was like the past. And I also thought it was kind of witty that he had 1 minute drills. You didn't even have to spend 12 minutes. It could be more responsive because he had 1 minute drills in it. However, as with everything, research comes out, things change, and sometimes it's very hard to let go of things that we thought were best before to now. And, you know, during the literacy buck, and I keep talking about it every episode, we don't have that much time. The urgency is so real to make sure that kids learn how to read. And now the research has found, as far as I know, and I'm not a researcher at all, I'm still in the trenches, I'm coaching, I'm teaching, I'm modeling. But according to the research, the high leverage skills are phoneme segmentation fluency. Am I correct? First sound fluency is very important, and that's tested on Acadians as well. However, are we spending too much time teaching these skills in isolation, or should, I think the research has shown that we have to connect it to the letters as well. Because when kids see a nonsense word on the Acadians, they're like, holy cow, I know the sounds. What do I do now?
Good point, Judy. Judy, you brought up so many good things. And you also brought up, I think, the elephant in the room. You mentioned David Kilpatrick. And, you know, the article did not say Dr. David Kilpatrick, but I think we all know that this article certainly referenced the work of David Kilpatrick in terms of this advanced phoneme proficiency idea. And I do think that a lot of people now are really, as you said, Tiffany, really pushing for it, believing that is part of this science of reading umbrella. And I also use the drills. I have the books. I attended Dr. Kilpatrick's presentations, but I have to be honest, and I brought this up on one of the episodes of the Literacy View. As I started really reading up what you posted, what Stephen Parker posted, others posted, I started to actually get angry because I felt a bit duped by this. And I was a little resentful because I pride myself on somebody who really tries to do the right thing, as I'm sure we all do, right? All teachers want to do the right thing, but we were getting mixed messages. And I kind of felt that when you brought this up, Tiffany, that people were almost telling you to be quiet about it. How did you feel?
Yeah, there was definitely some pushback because it was, like you said, a new idea. And it's kind of how we talk about, what the science of reading is, and people using balanced literacy saying, kind of pushing back on the science of reading as a term. It was going on within this science of reading movement. There was this camp of people saying, oh no, phonemic proficiency is very important. And when I was trying to highlight some of the research, some of Dr. Susan Brady's talks or her research, yes, and Linnea Airy's research, they were like pushing back on that. I think mostly because it conflicted with their current understanding of what the science said.
Yes. So Judy, do you find that from what you read or what you've witnessed, it could be either one, that this also has been misinterpreted?
Well, I'm going to be honest. For me, I didn't feel any sense of real anger. I think that, that was a great starting point for me professionally to start thinking and shifting, because, my old training was in balanced literacy, and I started making that shift like 6 years ago. So I think for me, I'm still really grateful about that body of work. And I've appreciated like companies like Hegarty, they had stuff going on, and I was like, why are we doing all these things? Do we need to do all these things? And you know what? They shifted. So I think part of the literacy world is acceptance, following the research. Listen, I'm not a researcher. I'm not a scientist. I'm just in the field. And it's really hard for a teacher that's just trying to get through the day and planning like 10 lessons and, making sure that their data is shifting and kids are learning. It's hard. So I'm kind of depending on people like you guys, Tiffany, and I know Nate is really involved in this stuff too. And I appreciate the work that he does. I think it's about acceptance. I think it's almost like people get so married to ideas, and then some people take breakups better than others. And you have to get divorced. I've been divorced, so I know how it feels, but it's like separating yourself from things you were really attached to. And, we had that cartoon when I was little. It was like Snoopy, Linus was really attached to his blanket and he couldn't let go. But sometimes we have to just let go. And I don't think the mean-spirited tone sometimes on Twitter is the right approach. I think being here right now, I feel so accepted. I feel calm and I feel like I could be who I am and say, hey, these were some things that I thought were great before, but maybe they weren't. But the other thing that's really important is I know that the research, and from what I was gathering for many years, is that phonemic awareness was the #1 predictor of reading success. Now that still holds true, yes?
Yeah, yes, it is a predictor, but it's different from teaching it in isolation away from letters. Isn't
Right.
that, Tiffany, isn't that really the core of the issue? I think that's what we're talking about here.
Yes, exactly. And it definitely is a predictor of later reading success, being able to blend and segment words orally. And I think that you brought up a great point, Faith, that assessment is different from instruction. When we assess a construct like phonemic awareness, we have to separate it from everything else. We have to separate it from letters, because letter sounds might get in the way of some students being able to do the task if they're in the task. So when we're assessing, we're trying to separate all of those constructs out. But that is different from what are the implications for instruction. And to that, we look to intervention studies.
Yeah, I could tell you that I was watching the reactions when you would bring up these articles. And then you and I texted privately. And from what I gather, you weren't in some groups anymore talking about this. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's just a lot of cognitive dissonance, like we were talking about before. And that's another part of my research background is in learning science and conceptual change. And we know that when a person has a misconception or a novice conception and goes to a scientific conception, the things that predict that is, one, they're dissatisfied with their current conception. A lot of people weren't dissatisfied with what they're already believing, so that presented a barrier. But then also the new thing has to be intelligible, plausible, and fruitful for them to be able to adopt it. And so it takes a little bit of time. And I think it was hard for people to say, maybe I was wrong about this thing, or not even wrong, but maybe it has more nuance than I was originally thinking, and make a change, especially when there's already been resources developed with this one concept of phonemic proficiency, saying maybe we weren't on the correct path, maybe we need to make a shift. I think that's difficult to do, especially in front of a large group of people.
Yeah, so here's some of my thoughts. People not only were attached to it, but continued to buy into this. All right, a lot of money, let's call it what it is, right? A lot of people were buying the books and buying a program and spending time on professional development in this. There is a cost to all of this in time and in money. Here's another quote from the article. And Seidenberg said, "I know this discussion is likely to be unpopular among people who have embraced the SOR. The main response I've gotten to talks in which I've raised some of these issues is that the comments were rude, even mean-spirited, and not what the audience wanted to hear. That is itself symptomatic of a problem. My concerns are not about loyalty to a movement or affinity to an author or product. They are not about whose team a person is on. They are not about the people involved, though they are about their work. And that to me sums it up, that there's this defense. If someone's on the right team, we're going to protect that person. And if somebody brings up some real important stuff, they're on the wrong team. So I kind of always find myself on the wrong team.
I think I'm on the wrong team with you, Faith.
Questioning, and it's not always popular. And oh, well, that's just the way it goes. But I want to get the real story. Your thoughts on that part of the article?
You know,
well, I just wanted to say that I think Seidenberg, he's brave, right? In life, we could either pretend, we could, it's almost like politics. People don't want to say what they believe or how they believe. And it's almost become like that in terms of literacy, that we have to be like, oh, I do this, but do you do this? Oh, should we do this? No, it's not a secret. These discussions are what bring us closer to shifting the needle. Time is limited. And, the concept of teaching phonemic awareness in the dark to strengthen the ears is fine, but it's time to put on the light and make sure you put on the light when it's time and shift, because research is finding that connection between sounds and seeing the visual print, meaning the text, is important.
Yes, Tiffany. Yeah.
Yeah. I think this brings up a really great point. Something I was talking with a colleague about just recently is like, there's two mindsets you could have. One is this thing that I do is my identity. And the other is this thing that I do is for this purpose of helping kids to read. And there might be some things wrong with it. And I can get rid of those things and I can put new things in, and it doesn't have an impact on who I am as a person. So when you hold your work as your identity versus holding your work as a means to the end goal, I think that holding it as an identity is where it becomes an issue, right? Because then you're more hesitant to change. You're more hesitant to, you would have to admit that something you were doing was wrong, instead of just thinking this thing that I previously thought was no longer the case and I'm going to make it better, right? And so it's definitely a mindset shift.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I don't know if you ladies remember, but Emily Hanford interviewed, I think it was Ken Goodman. And in asking him questions, his response was, my science is different.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we all laughed at that. People who believe in the science of reading chuckled, mocked it. People mocked it, right? It is kind of funny. My science is different. But yet, when you and others presented a different idea, it almost appeared that people in this camp, in this movement, without saying it, right? Without saying it, we responded to you like, my science is different.
Mm-hmm.
That's my thought.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was tied to, this is my identity, right? And if I can't, I have this mental schema around what the science is. And if what you're saying doesn't fit within this structure of what I already think it is, I'm going to see things through a different lens. So I'm going to interpret or look at only the evidence that fits my current schema of understanding, versus I want to question and think, are there ways to be better?
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Judy, you're in the field now, and I am sure that you are a great model for shifting. You are, and that's why, that's why I love doing this podcast with you. I love doing this podcast with you, because I could have done this with somebody who was already there completely, and then it would be just this echo chamber. I don't want an echo chamber. And I think the whole point of the literacy view is we don't want an echo chamber. We want to open the conversation up and shine a light on issues, right? And even if the discussion is difficult. So do some people, Judy, I'm just curious, ever feel like, and you could say this or not, I know sometimes it's uncomfortable, but as far as you shifting, do you intimidate people like by modeling such an open mindset? Just curious.
I think most teachers, to be quite honest, are pretty open-minded. I think they're really diving into the science as much as they can. They've shifted, a lot of teachers have shifted from just thinking running records is the way to go. So that's wonderful. Of course, all my views are my own, what might be happening in another school, or, these are my experiences. But I definitely do see a shift. I definitely see principals who are thinking about impact. So for a while, like I was collecting a lot of the data and I was tracking a lot of the data and I was writing all the notes, but that's not really building impact. So now principals I see are getting down and dirty with the data, having their teachers get down and dirty with that data, having workshops using the small grouping sheet that even Acadians and other screeners have as well to think about, okay, this is what the data is showing us. How do we become responsive? And I think the biggest thing that I'm seeing is principals want to become more responsive. I definitely see an uptick in people talking about phonemic awareness right now. I definitely see still a lot of low data on the screen where we still see a lot of kids are struggling in the red. So we're all looking. However, my concern is that I don't want people to think, oh, that's it. I got Hegarty or a different phonemic awareness program. Even UFLI, University of Florida, they have a little phonemic awareness portion in each of their lessons as well. I don't want people to think that this is the magic bullet. Do I think it will help? Yes. And one area that I definitely think it will help in a lot that I don't think we talk a lot about, and I hope we do on The View in the future as well, is I definitely feel that kids who struggle with phonemic awareness, that extra practice really helps them with writing and making that connection. Because if you can't hear the sounds, you might not spell very well either.
Okay, so which brings me to this point. Okay, so you brought up very good points. There's a difference between doing something and then saying it's the science of reading. So
Right.
if I like doing some oral activities, and I might find it is helpful, for instance, for those kids who might have dyslexia, perhaps trying to move them into fluency by doing some oral activities might be helpful, even if, let's say, science isn't showing it, perhaps. Is there something wrong with that? What are your thoughts, Tiffany, on that in terms of doing things that maybe do not have a strong research base, but because I have a ton of experience and Judy has a ton of experience, perhaps we find that this can be helpful. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think, well, it's a complicated question, right? Like if you're looking at it from the perspective of research, we definitely don't have research on every topic, and we don't have research on how to best teach everything we know, right? So there's a lot of unknowns, but there are knowns as well. And thinking about instructional efficiency, which is what Judy was talking about earlier with the literacy block, how can we use those things in ways that are most efficient? So if you're talking about oral activities with students and you're in line, right? We're always lining up, go to lunch, go to the restroom, wherever, go to recess. Those are great ways to get a lot of practice opportunities in where you normally wouldn't have any instructional time at all. So if you don't have a book in front of a student, if you don't have a table or a whiteboard, those oral activities can be super helpful, especially if you're working on those phoneme level skills of blending or segmenting or making it a game. I remember teaching first grade. We used to have to wait outside the art room for a little bit before we could go in, if the last class was running behind, and we'd play those little games. I'd say, okay, what word am I saying? Put your thumb up if you know. So they're all having to think, and then I'd call on someone with their thumb up, and we'd say do little things like that. So I think we're very creative as teachers, right? Think of ways to incorporate, if you want to try something, in ways that's still efficient use of your time.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up those transition periods of doing some oral activities. And I think that, as a teacher and as somebody who's been in the field a long time, I think making those decisions are acceptable. You are a teacher. You are able to have flexibility. And if you see that certain things are helpful, you're making a judgment. But to put it under the umbrella of, well, this is SOR. And I think Mark Seidenberg was very clear about calling something a movement as opposed to science. And I think that's something that two very different terms, right? So, Judy, any thoughts about this article that I didn't pull out? Do you have any quotes that maybe you saw that was interesting, or any idea? It doesn't even have to be a quote.
Yeah, so a lot of interesting stuff. I actually thought this article was a pleasure to read. So this was good. So one thing that I'm seeing in the field a lot, if I have to be honest, especially in kindergarten level, a lot of kids really, really, really struggle with blending. Like they can make the sounds, even like when they see the letters, they can make the sounds, but blending it is really hard for a lot of kids. So I've been playing with that a little bit. And that's an example where you can be responsive and try some things. You shouldn't be scared. So I talked with one teacher and another coach, and I was like, why don't we try to do some more blending, phonemic awareness blending activities, and see if that helps? So I don't think we should be fearful of trying things, because that's what responsive teaching is all about, right? And I think that we also have to think about our data in our classroom. That aligns with looking at all those pieces. I think part of the problem is, and I listened to Nate's podcast about this the other day as well, is there's so many terms being thrown out there. There's SOR, there's science, there's research, there's the word evidence. How do you put all these things together and still know you're doing the right thing?
Oh, stop right there. Tiffany, jump in, please. I love what Judy just said.
Wow, Faith, I'm doing good. No bullshit button today.
No BS button today. There's
not yet.
Not yet. I have to keep it available, but I don't know. Somehow I'm not feeling that BS button being used today. Go ahead, Tiffany, jump in.
No, yeah, all of those, you're totally right. Like people are using that term science of reading, just like you said, as this movement. And it goes back to that game of telephone, right? Like teachers don't have time or resources to read all of the research. Even researchers don't, right? Researchers specialize in one area of research, like early literacy or vocabulary. And so no one has read all of the research and can say, I know this for a fact, right? So I think that that's a really important thing. Another thing that caught my mind when you were talking was about the blending, right? And just trying different things with students, having them hold their motor on, right? Like that continuous blending. And I think you can make up so many different games with kids outside with movement. It can be fun, right? And it is different to say this is the science of reading, or I'm teaching the science of reading. That is not ever going to be a thing, right? The science of reading is not one package or one approach. But you can say it is based off of the science. And I think that that would be a better way to frame it.
You want to laugh, Tiffany? Judy and I did a New Year's Eve special, and it was just the two of us. And it was about different terms that we just couldn't stand. And one of the first things I said was the science of reading. And I said right away, people are going to be questioning, why would that term, science of reading? And one, I think it's very intimidating. It's like, oh, science.
It makes me a little uncomfortable, actually.
Exactly. And it doesn't really get people to want to change because they feel like, well, what was I doing before? And what does it take to get there? when a lot of it's just common sense. It is. If you just work it through and realize and what's logical and step away from this term, I think it could be more welcoming and not as much of a trigger. I think it really is a trigger for some people.
Yeah. And it's even using the term, the science of reading, seems too defined. It seems like everything exists within this one little circle that you're drawing your lines around, but really the research is way more interconnected. The science of reading, the science of learning, the science of writing, the science of spelling, the science of teaching reading. You could use all of these terms, right? But what we're drawing from is a lot of different types of research, and it's not one thing, it's not another. And part of that, and I was listening to Tiffany Hogan talk on her podcast about implementation science and talking about how it's not so much a research to practice gap as a practice to research gap. Like, we as researchers also need to be thinking about what's happening in classroom contexts, what's possible, what's helpful.
The reality.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm going to say something a little controversial. Are you ready?
Yes.
Are you scared?
No, no, we
right.
like that. We like
All right. All right. So some thoughts went through my mind. When we were saying before, we should be responsive, I feel like part of balanced literacy was like that a little bit. Like, we did things that were responsive, like we put in the shared reading, or we did this or that. Now, my fear is, I really do think that the phonemic awareness piece is a critical piece of the reading puzzle.
Of course.
And if we just leave it in the hands of each and every teacher, one teacher might not do it, and then we're back to a problem where we're saying, oh, everything we're doing is not working, look at my data. So part of me feels like it should be incorporated, whether it be tier 1, which is for the whole class, or maybe in some way in tier 2 or tier 3. But I don't think it should be totally left up to each individual teacher. I think it has to be a school-wide, not mandate.
So I'm going to tell you something. You know that I'm working with a district here on Long Island, and we brought in Sounds Right, that actually does the phonemic awareness with the teaching of phonics in a very efficient way. It's a speech to print program. And that's another issue that's a hot button issue, because it's not the OG philosophy. It comes from a different point, without rules and, without syllable types. And we could get into a whole discussion there, and I don't want to. My point is that in Sounds Right, you are always teaching phonemic awareness within the context of phonics. So you don't have this separation between the two. There's another program that I always talk about that is one-on-one. It's Word Wasp, that also uses this phonemic awareness work tied right into phonics without oral only activities, where you're listening for sounds in words and having to identify a vowel sound and isolate it and write the letter down, which I find to be so helpful, especially for those older kids. So Tiffany, I'll ask you a question. I don't know if you could respond, but what do you feel about this whole idea of shifting, that OG might not be gold standard?
Faith, don't even go there.
Oh no, I might get eggs thrown at me.
I think that's a complicated question.
That's why I asked it.
I will say, it's one effective approach. It's one approach we've seen is effective. It doesn't mean, and we've seen the, meta-analysis on OG come out, like, it doesn't mean it's the only effective approach. I will also say that print to speech and speech to print, and this is probably controversial as well, but being positioned against each other is the wrong way to look at it, because spelling is speech to print, reading is print to speech. We need both. They hold hands. We can all be friends, right? So if someone tells you we need a speech to print approach, you're like, yeah, for spelling, yes, that is great, but print to speech is also necessary. And that's why, for example, when you're teaching students phonics. You're teaching students the letter A, right? You teach A. Whenever I would teach it, we would teach all of the phonemes that go along with that grapheme from the beginning, from pre-K. They could look at the letter A and they'd say A, ah, because it says ah after a W, right? And so them being fluent with this helped them to read, but also helped them to spell. And then I could say, write down the grapheme that represents A, ah, or write down all the graphemes you know that represent A in a word. And they would put EIGH, they would put A, they would put AY, AI. So you can go from the speech to print or the print to speech, but teaching students to do both and hand in hand is what can really solidify those connections in their brain.
Right. And so like we're having this discussion and it's calm and we're listening. It doesn't happen like this always. All right. There's always like one person wants to be right. And this idea that, well, maybe you could have different approaches that both work. Maybe you might feel one is more efficient than the other, and maybe research will bear that out at some point. But, you know, instead of just attacking and rejecting, there needs to be this type of dialogue. And that's what Judy, I know, really stresses all the time, where she said to me, you know, sometimes it could feel like people on this SOR front are not quite accepting.
Yeah, I found the people on the balanced literacy side, when I was in that world, trained in reading recovery, a lot of the people I was with were very open-minded, and you know, a lot of them are trained in programs like Spire and so forth, and they've made shifts, and that side felt a little bit more loving and open. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, people are starting to warm up to me in this new world, right? I've been in this world now for 6 years, and I'm really vocal about it now because that's how passionate I feel. But yeah, I just feel that, you know, the thing that makes us unique at the Literacy View is I'm not attached to any company. I don't work for Hegarty. I don't work for foundations. I don't work for WordWasp, for Word Warning. I'm going to speak my mind, right? I'm not going to hold back and be afraid, oh my God, I made this scientist upset or this literacy expert upset. It's not really about me. It's about the kids. It's about the kids, and we have to start shifting. And I think, you know, a lot of these materials, even the research-based ones and evidence-based ones, they were written a long time ago. There might be shifts, so they might have to start making some of those shifts. Like even, should I name a program? No, I won't name a program. But there's something that says trick words. Well, now we know they're not fully tricky, and we could talk about those tricky parts in a much different way than we did before. And even thinking about the past, right? That's an assessment, right? Research kind of evidence-based, right? Is that going to shift? Is it still going to include all those parts? There were some parts on that assessment that were tricky for me. It was like almost like take the word backwards and say it backwards. I mean, but I was like, what the hell is this? I'm done with that. I'm done.
You know, you're so right that, you know, I've shared that with some adults and I'm like, I can't do this.
I can't. We could do an episode where we just give those words to each other and see what the world says about
I
us.
think we'll be
and I'll say this is
button a lot.
And that's a great conversation to have, right? Because like if as fluent readers we can't do those things, we probably don't need to be training these in kids, right? And so like I know it's a whole state had mandated, you know, multiple states have mandated use this specific assessment, you know, use the past or do these phonemic proficiency things. And they've been walking back recently on this because they've realized it hasn't been validated. It doesn't actually have a lot of research to back it up. And so I've seen state standards change and completely take out some of these advanced phonemic awareness or phonological skills, because they know that phoneme level skills are super important, and blending and segmenting is really important. And so we do see, you know, this as this pendulum kind of swung a little bit too far with that science of reading movement, it can even back out and say, what does research actually say?
You know, I think Judy brought up again, Judy, you're on fire today, girl. You are on fire today.
Well, you know, let me just say one thing, Faith. This is the 1-year anniversary of the Literacy View. Our first episode was actually on phonemic awareness, and
Isn't that, I
right?
did not realize, that's right. Our very first episode was on phonemic awareness, when I talked about how I was just annoyed by, almost keeping some of this a bit hidden. And now it's a year later. Isn't that amazing? So what I was going to say is Judy is on fire with this, because I do think, and and this will be my last point about this, I think when your paycheck depends on a certain theory, that you get very protective over it. And so, it's hard to stay open-minded about things when your paycheck really depends on that, whether it's a product or whatever you do, or your career as a professor, or a certain professional group, that you have the people on your team and you don't want to step away from that. So that whole idea that Judy just mentioned, that we don't have any allegiance to anybody or anything, really does make a difference. Your thoughts, Tiffany, on that?
Yeah. So, I do work for NWEA now. So
it's
a not-for-profit company, but what I specifically do, I love, because I get to translate research and create professional development for teachers around that content. And we have a lot of say in what goes in on the professional development. It's not that we have to align to a specific, I know NWEA does assessment. We don't mention assessment in the product. It's all, what does the research say? And how can we help teachers best understand this? And so if I was, for example, working for a company that, like you said, aligns to a specific viewpoint, it would be very hard to knowingly create things that are missing pieces or are skewed for me, right? And so it would be hard for me to work for something that put a rein on what could or couldn't get to teachers. But I think everyone's just trying to do the best they can with what they have. And I think part of the problem is, like you mentioned, teachers aren't always given resources that align to what they know is best for kids. And so they're having to go and find these things on their own time or create these. And that can allow for autonomy, but it can also just burn people out. And so I think it's really important that we help by pointing to resources and curricula that are helpful.
Is there anything we haven't asked you, Tiffany, that you would like to talk about, that I missed or Judy missed in terms of this conversation? Because I think this was rocking. I loved it. But if there's something that I missed or Judy missed, please just say it now.
I think it was great. I really like that y'all highlighted the point of view of a learner mindset, because I think that's what we could all have and model more of, is like that. All the teachers, all my friends that are teachers, that's the kind of mindset that they have, is like, I want to learn and do what's best for kids. And I know that can be also a frustrating part, because when we see the science of reading movement out here and we see all these people saying different things, teachers can get very overwhelmed with, well, I heard the science of reading is this here, but yesterday I heard it was this thing that's different. And that can be a very hard thing for someone to say, what is really the truth, right? Because all of these articles are behind paywalls and it just takes too much time to go through them on their own. So I think that's a major issue right now, is that we really need to go back to the research instead of saying, what did this person or that person say? And I don't know the answer to that.
Judy, any thoughts? Last thoughts?
Final thoughts. So, many teachers are not scientists. We're relying on those researchers to, communicate, let us know what's right coming from the top, and, sharing that information. And I thought that there was a very interesting piece of the article today. It said, the reading wars are not over. Some people on TikTok are saying that they're over. They're not. Nothing is resolved until data shifts. So if we really want the data to shift, we have to be ready to evolve, to be open-minded, and also not fall for tricks. Just because a box is going to say it's the science of reading with a sticker on it, ask those questions.
Yes.
That's
Good
it.
point. Good point, Judy. Tiffany, we thank you. And I just want to, my last thought really is about this article as a whole. Thought there were great things in it. My only criticism is I think that Seidenberg sometimes comes off in a way that perhaps could turn some people off. And I think that the information is good, but delivery is just as important. And so I think that maybe people in your field, the scientists, the researchers, maybe they need to be more like you in terms of how you are really looking at this and how people take a message. I think how you send a message is very important. It's not just the science. I think that everybody has to soften it a bit and be a little bit more open. So that's my last thought. And anyhow, we thank you for your time. We know you're busy, but this was so great. And I'm so glad we had this time with you. Judy, I know you want to plug us, so go ahead, girl.
All right, you're going to help with the plugs today because I didn't write it down as usual. Follow us on Twitter at BoxnerJudy. Follow Faith on Twitter. What's your handle again?
It's Faith Workowski, High Five Literacy.
Follow us on Facebook, Real Teachers Letting Loose, the Literacy View.
Real Teachers.
And also, come party with us. April 29th
Woo!
is our birthday. Faith and I are both April babies. We've never met in person, so we can't wait to give each other a hug, bring our bullshit button, laugh, drink with you guys, hang out in Times Square, New York City. We'll be at the Margaritaville on the rooftop, April 29th at 4:30.
Tiffany, you're coming? You're flying in?
I wish, man.
Yes.
And we're also celebrating our 1-year anniversary. We thank all our viewers. We thank you for all the collaboration. And we hope we make a difference for the kids.
Great. All right, everyone. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.